deliver what certified, campsites are available to tourists. And it was all based around the idea that it's very difficult to access information when you're on the road, especially public toilets and dump stations and designated free campsites. So what we did was basically make a free app that was available to tourists, very easy to download. It's in English, German, Chinese and French, and all the information's there.
You have a relationship with the much criticised camper van companies, don't you? I mean, how much are they doing, do you think, Adam, to make sure their clients don't trash New Zealand?
Most of them are doing a pretty good job. What we do is we provide them some tools such as videos. We provide, access to our app for their customers and basically say, look, here's some educational tools to provide to your customers when they book a camper van, and then they send them on the road. Most of them that we deal with are actually pretty good, and they understand they've got a responsibility to the customers and also to New Zealand. Most are pretty proactive. We get a good response from camper van companies.
Should we have more toilet and ablutions facilities? What's your opinion on that?
I mean, it's always good to have more, but I think the solution lies in education. So making tourists aware that, prior to today, how many Kiwis knew that there was an app, where you could find public toilets? I don't think there were many. So imagine if you're a tourist coming into the country and then, how do you find those toilets? So I think, letting tourists know that there is this free app for them to help find public toilets and facilities. But we've got 4,000 public toilets on the database at the moment. So there's certainly a lot of them all around New Zealand. It's just about providing a tool to the tourists to make it easier to find them.
All right, Adam, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Adam Hutchinson, the creator of Campermate.
Who knew there was 4,000 public toilets in New Zealand?
I know. Never
there
one
you
when
go.
you need one. Now, we probably won't talk about St David's Day because I want to ask about the Dunedin students, but you actually do have some Welsh heritage in you, don't you?
It's not heritage that I've embraced, but today it has brought back memories of Grandad cooking certain Welsh things in the kitchen, from tripe to sweetbread, which isn't really that sweet.
Yuck.
And of course, Call, the big... Yes. St David is said to have performed miracles, most significantly when he caused the ground to rise beneath him when he preached, so everyone could see and hear him. And that was really ahead of its time. I want to ask before we go, Amanda, about the student problem in Dunedin and the letter to Otago's Vice-Chancellor with the signatures, 10 signatures, asking her to keep them safe at university, these young women, and an unacceptable and insidious level of harassment in the student quarter, aggression towards women. And people have probably read the story today, and the police are acknowledging a constant stream of complaints about criminal behaviour of a sexual nature in Dunedin. You will remember what the North End used to be like. Are you surprised about what it's sounding like now?
Well, look, you've asked me this and there's only 1.5 minutes to go, Jim.
I know.
I had quite a lot to say about this, actually, because I spoke to my son, who's a graduate of Otago, because I actually, recognise that it's not. I left Dunedin many years ago. But I think we've got to take into account certain things, that this is really cyclical. And as a former newspaper journalist in Dunedin, I know what happened in O Week every year when I was a cadet journalist on the Evening Star. And I think it still happens, is that everybody knew what a good headline it was when the students behaved badly. Now, I'm not condoning any of this stuff that goes on. And when I talked to my son about it, he said that's just unacceptable, what these guys said to these women, and that's just inappropriate. But there is a thing about, I think that's what's happening, is that there's such a tradition in Dunedin. And my son said, there is quite a lot of pressure to make something bigger and be more shocking every year. So whether or not that's part of the whole thing, I don't know. But there's the music, and I've got a lot more I could say about this, Jim.
I know you do, and I should have gone to it earlier, but,
yeah.
Never mind. We didn't, but thank you. And thank you for coming on the panel today, Amanda, as well.
Yeah, it was great to be here.
Andre Rowell, nice to have you make your debut. Come back again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening, everybody. And Checkpoint with John Campbell is on the way.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell on behalf of the Checkpoint team. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, Katruda and the people lobbying for it. We hear from them and the Minister joins us live to respond. We also have Pharmac Minute saying that the current treatment they fund is, and I quote, ineffective for most patients. Also tonight, Donald Trump. Lampoon him all you like, but we're joined by an American journalist who says the joke will be on the people laughing at him if he wins. Extraordinary witness evidence in the Tully trial, life on the minimum wage or just above it. We talked to the parliamentary cleaner about what that's like. 0 hours and political machinations, and basketball's Breakers live from Perth on the eve of their first final. But first, here's Leilani Mamoisia with RNZ News.
Talofa lava, good evening. A patient with advanced melanoma has told the Health Minister the drug Keytruda must be funded urgently. Lisa Renwick from Tauranga presented a petition today signed by more than 11,000 people to Jonathan Coleman. Mrs Renwick told Dr Coleman she has had to put her own money towards the drug, but not everyone can do that.
1 New Zealander dies of melanoma every day. So we can't, I'm sorry, but we can't wait. We can't wait for budgets. We can't wait for some promise in the future. We need this drug right now.
Lisa Renwick. The Health Minister said a funded treatment for melanoma is on the way, but said the government would let Pharmac make a decision that was in the best interests of the greatest number of New Zealanders. The government has launched a multi-pronged attack on gangs and gang culture. It aims to divert people from joining gangs and penalises them severely if that fails. A new gang intelligence centre will link several state agencies, and there will be attempts to dissuade children from taking up the gang way of life. A long-time gang member and advocate for gangs, Dennis O'Reilly, says it is a good start.
This is going in the right direction if it means an attempt to lift families that are in trapped lifestyles out of that lifestyle. For the first time, it introduces carrot and stick. We've not seen much carrot for 30 years or so. It's whānau in communities that the answer sits with.
Dennis O'Reilly. The government also aims to crack down on drugs, illegal gains and firearms. A policewoman was admitted to hospital and 5 people arrested for disorderly behaviour after a protest forced the Hawera District Court to close this morning. Patricia Tahere Green and Kylie Kathleen Green were appearing on theft and receiving charges relating to Shell Todd Oil Services seismic survey pegs. Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin has more.
Trouble began when Patricia Green refused to enter the dock and then asked to see Judge Gary Barkle's identification. The judge ordered her to be taken to the cells, and a struggle began between Green's supporters and police and court staff. The court was cleared and the fracas continued outside, where protesters fought with police reinforcements. The police say a female officer was assaulted and received minor injuries. The defendants will reappear on March the 31st. This is Robin Martin.
The government may be forced to change its plans to amend employment laws to get the support it needs for the legislation in Parliament. The Labour Party says it could support the changes if the bill can be altered to deal with 0 hours contracts. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The Employment Standards legislation bill would extend paid parental leave to 18 weeks and also mean employers wouldn't be able to cancel shifts without plenty of notice. If they did, they'd have to pay their workers compensation. Labour's been in talks with the government about the bill but says further changes need to be made for its full backing. The Workplace Relations Minister says he's willing to listen to ideas that'll improve the bill. The bill needs to be passed in time to meet the April the 1st date for the extension of paid parental leave. From Parliament, Chris Bramwell.
The trial of the man accused of killing 2 work and income staff has heard from the man who chased after the gunman as he made his escape. Russell Tully is charged with the murders of Lee Cleveland and Peggy Noble and the attempted murder of 2 of their colleagues at the Ashburton Winds office in 2014. Today, David Coos told the High Court in Christchurch that he was talking to the receptionist, Peggy Noble, when the masked gunman walked into the office and shot her. Covered in gunpowder, Mr. Coos ran from the building. He later confronted the gunman outside, ignoring warnings that he would be shot if he didn't back off.
He started freaking out. I rattled him that much that he dropped his helmet and bike lock on the ground.
David Coos ran after the gunman, coming within a metre of him as he made off on his push bike, but couldn't catch him. The crews of 15 fire engines and a helicopter with a monsoon bucket are battling a scrub fire in Upper Hutt, which is threatening 2 houses. Firefighters were called just after 2 o'clock to the blaze, which started on Beechwood Lane and travelled up the hill to Mount Maroa Way. The police are diverting traffic on State Highway 2. Into sports now, the Highlanders' defence of their Super Rugby title has suffered a major setback, with All Black winger Waisake Naholo ruled out for up to 2 months with a fractured leg. The team doctor, Greg McLeod, says it's the same leg he injured before the World Cup last year, but is not as bad as he's expected to recover in 6 to 8 weeks. Last year, Naholo returned home to Fiji for alternative treatment for his fracture and surprisingly recovered in time to be picked for the World Cup. However, the Highlanders say that won't be happening this time, and Naholo's rehabilitation will be monitored by McLeod. Netball New Zealand says it's not a fait accompli that Trans-Tasman round-robin matches will be done away with under changes to the ANZ Championship. This year's competition is yet to start, but already Netball New Zealand and its Australian counterpart are finalising the competition format for 2017. The Chief Executive of Netball New Zealand, Hilary Poole, says New Zealand and Australia may not play each other until a finals playoff.
That is a possibility, but it's only one of the scenarios we're looking at. We're working towards sort of mid-season, so sort of in that May time frame is when we're aiming to confirm ultimately the format of the competition.
This year's ANZ Championship starts on April the 1st, and that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the legislative odyssey of Daryl Yu, who ended up working for the Environmental Protection Agency of the United Arab Emirates. He even ruled on proposals for an atomic power station. I wonder what the oil lobby thought of that. And our mathematician, Dr. Dylan Mayhew, on the ABC conjecture, one of maths' great puzzles. I think they call it ABC as a joke. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And the Met Service weather till midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, there's scattered showers, clearing from the south tomorrow and becoming mostly fine. Bay of Plenty is fine tomorrow. Waikato to Taranaki, also Taupo and Taumaranui, fine and cloudy periods. Isolated afternoon and evening showers tomorrow about Waikato and Taumaranui. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, patchy rain or drizzle, clearing south of Wairoa by midday tomorrow and easing to isolated showers further north. Wanganui to Wellington, also Taihape and Wairarapa, cloud about Wellington and Wairarapa, clearing tomorrow morning. Marlborough and Canterbury, cloudy periods with patchy drizzle overnight. The remainder of the South Island is mainly fine, but isolated light showers about the south coast. And the Chatham Islands, there's cloudy periods and a few showers. And I'll be back with news headlines at 5:30. It's 5:08.
Thanks, Leilani. Busy old show tonight. Let's get on with it. We begin with the politics of medicine. A petition presented at Parliament containing 11,000 signatures calling for the funding of Keytruda for advanced melanoma. Was it an emotive squeaky wheel seeking very expensive oil? Was it terribly ill people fighting desperately for their lives? Was it a legitimate attempt to address a gap in Pharmac's funding? Tonight we look at all of that. We also look at the drug currently available for the treatment of metastasised melanoma. It's a form of chemotherapy called dacarbazine. Pharmac minutes from 2012 describe it, and I quote, as ineffective for most patients. More on that later. But that brings us to the lobbying for the new alternative, an expensive form of immunotherapy. Again, I quote from Pharmac, "For Pharmac to justify an investment of this size, we'd need to see more certainty of benefit in the evidence." Now, Lisa Renwick was the petition organiser. Having been given 3 weeks to live in May of last year, she funded Keytruda herself, and the cancer that was killing her is now in remission. I spoke to her shortly after she passed over the petition to Health Minister Jonathan Coleman.
I'm very pleased that he came down and heard us, and I'm very pleased that he's walking around and talking to other melanoma patients. I hope it lasts beyond today. I hope it lasts beyond the cameras, when the cameras disappear after today. I hope he keeps talking to us, because we really do need these drugs funded now. We can't live on a promise. There is nothing else. I don't think most New Zealanders understand. There's nothing else for melanoma patients. There's no other hope than to get access to these drugs. And because it's such a fast-acting disease, as we both know, if it takes a couple of months, people will be dead. Some of the people standing here today will be dead. And somebody has to be held accountable for that. Because we live in a country where if you get sick, you should be able to go to the hospital, and there should be a treatment plan for you. There should be a team that comes and helps you. And in this country, it's not the doctor's fault, but they have nothing to offer but to ask you how much money you have.
Lisa,
exactly
people have said this is a motive. People have said there shouldn't be lobbying through the media. People have said this is not the appropriate way to go about it. What is your response to that?
Well, then I'd really like to know what the appropriate way is, because Pharmac has no accountability. There's no disputes process. There's no way to appeal if they've made a wrong decision. They do a lot of really good stuff, and I know that there's some good people working there, but if they make a mistake, if they refuse to treat patients, if they refuse to recognise medication that's been recognised in Australia and Canada and the UK as being effective, there's no option but to go to the media. There's no other way to appeal that decision. So those people, please tell me what the appropriate avenue is. I'd love to know.
Did you feel comforted by what the Minister said? Do you now think this is on the table?
No, because there's no certainty in what he said. I mean, I am thankful that he's come down. It was nice to finally meet him, but you can make vague promises, can't you? But that provides no certainty to people who need hope. They need to know when they're going to get hold of this medicine. I mean, when I was waiting to get treatment, and I had the ability to pay for it, my family had to work hard to keep me alive even for those few weeks. How long are these people going to have to wait? They need this medicine now. So no, we need some certainty. We need more precise information. I hope that Dr. Coleman has now opened up a dialogue. I hope that patients now have the ability to actually speak to him and provide their input. Because to make decisions without getting a patient perspective, well, that's wrong. I mean, this is a motive. It's a motive because there are people dying. And there's no way to step around that. It's a fact.
Dr. Coleman's opened up a dialogue with you, but that's very different from the Minister talking to Pharmac. And in fact, he says it's not appropriate for him to talk to Pharmac.
Now, call me a cynic, John, but I'm pretty sure he talks to Pharmac. If he doesn't, I'd actually, again, like to know who it is that Pharmac's accountable to if it's not the Minister of Health. I mean, is that not the Minister of Health's job? They have to be accountable to someone. They spend $800 million worth of taxpayer funds every year.
Yeah.
Gosh, they have to be accountable. If not, they should be.
You, Lisa, you cited an example of other government spending. Did you get the opportunity to say that to the Minister, Jonathan Coleman, himself, and what did you say?
I said that when they speak about having no spare money in the budget, I'm surrounded by the national flag here. It's flapping all around me. Not the National Party flag, the New Zealand national flag, I hasten to add. And all I can think of is $27 million. Now, the estimates I've heard for funding pembrolizumab for a year are between $15 and $20 million. That's less than the price of the flag referendum. If we have money to spend on that, surely we have money to spend saving people's lives. Surely that's more important. And if it's not, at least come down and look people in the face and tell them that the flag is more important than they are. Tell them that pandas and farms in Saudi Arabia are more important. Look them in the eye and tell them the truth, and don't pretend that it's nothing to do with them.
It's Lisa Renwick, the petition organiser. Health Minister Jonathan Coleman joins us shortly. We'll also hear from our health correspondent later in Checkpoint. Dr. Anthony Ribas is a tumour immunologist and lead scientist at UCLA's Johnson Comprehensive Cancer Centre in LA. Now, he has led a large phase 1 clinical trial of pembrolizumab, that's Keytruda, involving 600 patients. It's the biggest such trial to date. He said he was here 3 months ago and he met with Health Minister Jonathan Coleman at the time.
I was appalled by the country with the highest incidence of melanoma being stuck with a chemotherapy drug that's a 4-year-old drug when there's many others that have been proven to be superior.
So this is dacarbazine you're talking about?
Yeah.
And so do you regard that drug as efficacious?
I regard that drug as marginally efficacious, and it's you could make an argument that in some patients it's not even worth trying.
So what did you discuss with our health minister when you met him?
I discussed that in the last 5 years there have been results of at least 7 randomized trials demonstrating that there are treatments that are superior in terms of overall survival compared to the dacarbazine. And I understand that those are expensive drugs. I understand that there's limited resources. But if you're using an old treatment that doesn't work, that gives a response rate of less than 10%, where the 90% of the patients will not get the benefit, and the ones who get benefit, it will only be transient. And instead of that, you're passing on treatments that can give response rates of 30, 40, 50%, many of them being long-lasting, avoiding the expense of a dying person, that overall it should be cost-effective for the country.
Dr. Anthony Ribas, a Keytruda researcher who was in New Zealand a few months ago and spoke with Jonathan Coleman at the time. I think we are joined now on the phone by the Minister. Minister, thank you for calling in. We appreciate your time today. You went down and met those people on the steps, and this is the intersection, isn't it? The difficult intersection of what ought to be a dispassionate process as Pharmac sees it, but is a very human one when people who are dying turn up with their petition to meet you.
Good afternoon, John. Well, look, you're absolutely right. And, I was down there talking to people who have faced and are still facing real challenges in battling against melanoma. There are a large number of people there. And, I just commend them for coming to Parliament and making their voice heard. And I can assure them that, I've been listening very carefully to their stories and actually have been through a number of months. I've been talking with colleagues behind the scenes, as the PM has said today. Look, something is inevitably going to happen in this area in terms of Pharmac funding a melanoma drug. But they're in complex commercial negotiations. They've just got to work through those. But in the end, all the money in the Pharmac budget is spoken for, and it's a matter of getting more money into the budget at the national budget on the 26th of May. So that's what I'm advocating.
OK. I want to return to that because there seems to be an implication in that change is on the way. But can we look at dacarbazine, which is the form of chemotherapy that is really the only form of treatment for advanced melanoma?
Yeah.
That is available, publicly funded in this country at present, full stop. That's the totality of it. Now, if we go back to the minutes of Pharmac's Pharmacology and Therapeutics Advisory Committee in 2012, they were unequivocal. They say that it has a poor response, it is ineffective, and there is a high unmet medical need. If that's what they're saying about the only drug they fund, why are they still funding it?
Well, look, the point is we're moving on to this new class of drugs, and we weren't having this debate a year ago. but we are now. There's going to be more of these drugs. There's a number of drugs in the same class as Keytruda, and Pharmac has to work out actually which is going to be the most effective for the greatest number of people. But in the end, they're going to need more money to actually fund a treatment in the melanoma area. So it's very important we leave this as an arm's length decision from government, because otherwise you get political interference.
Look, I heard your morning report this morning. I thought it was a fine mea culpa from you, because National hasn't always been arm's length, has it? I mean, you campaigned hard for Herceptin. You're now saying, actually, that was a mistake. I note Andrew Little and Annette King were down with the petitioners today. Politics is inevitably going to intrude, isn't it? Particularly when you're in opposition.
Well, look, I mean, different things happen in opposition to how things are run in government. We've been in government 7 years. Look, the process was flawed back in 2008. Actually, funding for Herceptin was the right thing to do, and it was Pharmac that funded it. But look,
after immense pressure from the National Party, let's not evade that.
Yeah. So I've said that. I spoke about that this morning at length. So yep.
Okay.
Correct.
Are you going to put extra money in the budget for Pharmac so they can address the deficiencies of the current treatment, which they themselves have explicitly acknowledged, and turn in some form or other towards immunotherapy?
Well, the Prime Minister said today that there will be more money in the budget for health, as there always is. There's very, very likely to be more money for Pharmac, and that will allow them to have some options over what they fund. So, no final budget decisions have been made, but I will be strongly advocating that we need more money for Pharmac. But I can't guarantee Keytruda will be funded, but it looks like a melanoma treatment is on the way, but they've got to weigh up which is the best possible one.
Okay. Are you speaking to the Milligan Institute, who are doing work in New Zealand on this very subject?
Oh, look, I've visited the Institute. I know Graham Milligan. I have had various discussions with them over time. We haven't been in contact specifically about melanoma drugs over the past few days, but the point is science is evolving very quickly.
Absolutely.
Other big challenges, we're going to be faced with lots and lots of new biologic medications to fund for a wide range of conditions. Keytruda is the first of these issues, so we've got, as a nation, a lot to deal with over the next few years. That's my view.
Minister, how do you get the balancing act right? Because the people who have just been diagnosed are going to be listening to this and say, look, this is all very well. The theoretical, the hypothetical, the dispassionate are all very well, but not for me. Because I am dying. The only drug you can give me at present has been described by Pharmac itself as ineffective. I need something, and I need it now.
And that's why Pharmac's working on this at the moment.
Okay. Minister, is it fair to say that actually you have agreed amongst yourselves to give Pharmac more money for precisely this kind of immunotherapy, and you are simply working with Merck or another drug company to try and drive their very expensive prices down?
So the government's not working with drug companies.
Sorry, Pharmac. Sorry, is Pharmac trying to drive the prices down?
Pharmac is in negotiations, but I've got to emphasise no decisions on the budget have been made, but health always does get more money. The PM pretty much indicated today that, it's likely something will end up being funded for melanoma treatment before too long. So, look, we're just going to have to wait for the budget, but I can tell you this is right at the top of my priority list.
Health Minister Jonathan Coleman, who has just joined us at, I think, raced to the phone this evening. We appreciate your time. We'll have more on this after 6 o'clock tonight, including a report by RNZ News health correspondent Karen Brown, who has looked at this issue in great depth. And she will be with us after 6. Coming up next, a woman who was shot at the Ashburton Work and Income Office tells the court she heard another woman pleading for her life. And later, the owner of a commercial cleaning company says he's going to find it difficult paying the minimum wage. We talked to a parliamentary cleaner about what life is like on just above the minimum wage. We would love your feedback in any way you choose. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Our text number is 2101. 24 minutes past 5. A woman who was shot in the leg at the Ashburton Work and Income Office in 2014 said she thought she was going to die when a man pointed a gun at her head, and she wondered who would look after her family. 3 people who were inside the building during the fatal shooting gave evidence in the trial of Russell Tully at the High Court in Christchurch today. Mr Tully is accused, of course, of killing WINZ workers Peggy Noble and Lee Cleveland and the attempted murder of 2 of their colleagues. Sally Murphy reports.
Lindy Curtis started Monday, September the 1st in 2014, just like any other day. She said she was helping prepare a CV for her client when she heard a blast and saw a man with a gun.
My immediate thoughts was that it was a hoax and that somebody maybe was coming in to take us hostage. I didn't really comprehend what was going on.
She recalled how she hid under her desk and watched the gunman walk around the room. She told the court the next thing she knew, the gunman was in front of her with the gun pointed at her head.
Do you remember what went through your mind at that point?
I thought that I was history and I was wondering who was going to look after my family.
Miss Curtis said the gunman fired and shot her in the leg.
I seem to remember him looking at me and looking down on my leg, and I was thinking to myself, he knows he shot me in the leg and he might take a second shot.
She said she can't remember the exact sequence of events that unfolded in the office.
I recall somebody saying, please, I beg you, you don't have to do this. And then I heard a gun blast.
Her client, Tristan Gibson, also gave evidence today. He said he remembers the gunman glancing at him while he lay under the desk with Miss Curtis. During questioning from the Crown Prosecutor, Andrew McRae, he said altogether he heard 3 gunshots.
After you heard that final shot, do you know what happened?
He walked straight out the front door again.
And what was the manner in which he moved around the office? How did he go about it?
He was just calm. He just gracefully walked out like he owned the place.
A WINZ employee, Leanne Hydes, told the court she was in the cafeteria when she thought she heard an explosion.
When I sort of stopped to take stock of it, it sounded like a car had hit the building. And so I walked to the edge of the cafeteria door and looked around, and then I heard another noise and I thought, oh my God, that's a gun.
Miss Hyde said she heard a noise like someone was trying to break down the door.
And then I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there. Then it sort of went quiet and I thought, God, I have to get out of here. So I walked back to the hallway, and then I heard another one, and then I could smell it. I could smell that it was, gunpowder.
Russell Tully was not in court to hear the evidence today. There are about 20 witnesses who are still to give evidence in the trial, including those who examined the WINZ office after the shooting. At the High Court in Christchurch for Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
Let's go from Christchurch and Ashburton to Dunedin. Is there an unacceptable level of abuse in the student stronghold of North Dunedin? A group of students has written to the university's Vice-Chancellor calling for action against behaviour they describe, and now Otago University and its Students' Association are starting education programs later this year against verbal abuse and harassment. The problems spiked reportedly last week during the annual orientation week. Ian Telfer reports from Dunedin.
A former Otago University student, Jessie Lee Robertson, says last Friday afternoon she was in her car just outside the university when a group of mostly young men pulled up alongside. One yelled that if she didn't have her dog there, he would rape her. Ms Robertson believes the men were Otago University students, though that's not been proven.
There was a lot of them in there, so it was definitely terrifying. I was alone in my car, which is like one of the safest places that you can be, with my dog, my 2 safe things. It was awful.
She says the rest of the young women and young men in the van just laughed along. She says she knows of other cases, including one in which a young woman was chased down the street by a group of 3 male students. She says the culture seems to be getting worse.
Who's teaching this stuff? Who says that these boys, that it's okay to do this to young girls or any girl? And what happens to the other girls, like the really young girls that come from small towns that come to Dunedin to study and meet these guys?
The new Students' Association president, Laura Harris, had already decided combating sexual violence and harassment would be one of her top priorities this year. It's front and centre now.
The behaviour that they're outlining is absolutely unacceptable, and the student sector consider it absolutely unacceptable as well. So it's not something that we tolerate in our community, and it is a big concern for us, and we believe very strongly in moving forward and making sure that we come to solutions.
Laura Harris says the Students' Association's working on an education program for students moving from halls of residence out into private flats, and has restarted a Thursdays in Black anti-violence campaign. But she warns it's far from an Otago-only problem.
It's definitely not a problem specific to Dunedin. It's something I myself have experienced, both in Dunedin but also in Invercargill where I grew up, and in the Gold Coast when I visited there, and even in Japan.
That might be, but yesterday 11 students wrote to the university's Vice-Chancellor, Harleen Hayne, calling on her to do something. One, Emma Tamilty, says the university has to take charge because there's a small but loud group of young men who are influencing new students.
The university brings this element into the community, and the community benefits from having students. That's not up for discussion. Of course they do, but at the same time, the university has a key responsibility to making the community a safe one, and I think it has the possibility of doing that because it has so much contact time with them.
Professor Haynes says the university is developing 2 of its own educational programs, one for the second semester this year and another for orientation week next year. But she says many of this year's problems, including a series of couch burnings, appear to have been caused by out-of-towners, and she can't take responsibility for them. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Ian Telfer.
News headlines in 30 seconds. Coming up after them, Nona with business. The government comes good on a promise to crack down on gangs, including plans to dissuade children from joining them. How are they going to do that? The Minister joins us live. Super Tuesday looms in the US. Just how is Donald Trump going to go? And if your temptation is to laugh at him, this American journalist says that suits him fine. It's a fascinating interview. But first, here's Leilani Mamoisia with the news headlines.
The Health Minister has told melanoma patients a funded treatment for the cancer is on the way. Jonathan Coleman made the comment outside Parliament, where a petition signed by 11,000 people was presented to him by patients with advanced melanoma. They lack an effective funded treatment for the cancer and say the drug Keytruda should be funded. Dr Coleman says the government is having discussions now about more money for Pharmac in the budget. A long-time gang member and mediator and advocate for gangs says a new policy on them is a good start. The government has launched a multi-pronged attack on gangs, seeking to deter new recruits and children, gathering more information and tackling drugs, illegal games and firearms. A community worker with gangs, Dennis O'Reilly, says the scheme uses a carrot as well as a stick, which is good because people connected with gangs often need help. A policewoman was admitted to hospital and 5 people arrested for disorderly behaviour after a protest forced the Hawera District Court to close this morning. 2 women were appearing on theft and receiving charges relating to seismic survey pegs. The trial of the man accused of killing 2 work and income staff has heard from a man who chased after the gunman as he made his escape. The government may be forced to change amendments to employment laws to deal with 0 hours contracts to get the support it needs for the legislation in Parliament. Otago University and its Students' Association have revealed plans for programs to combat sexual harassment. And it's 27 to 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Leilani. With the headlines, full news at 6 from Leilani. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Beltier. Nona, what have you been looking at today?
Well, I've been looking at the markets, of course. Yes, indeed. And not so much on a corporate front. We haven't had really any corporate reporting today as such in terms of financial reports. We're waiting for the financial year ending January 31st results to come in when we're going to see a lot of those retail companies, including Fonterra. Speaking of Fonterra, we've got our global dairy trade auction tomorrow.
Right.
And the market is expecting prices to pick up after 4 consecutive falls.
How reliable are these predictions? Because I think I've heard that at least once prior to one of these 4 consecutive falls.
Well, yes, indeed. But Fonterra watches these things closely, and there are other experts, and they reckon that the Chinese supply has finally got to a point where they need to start buying again.
There's been lots of coverage of the dairy debt, hasn't there? And
That's
some
right.
of these heavily leveraged farmers who converted at the top of the market when things were so good will be aching, actually desperate for prices to rise.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of news coming out recently of some serious problems down on the farm there. So, and of course that was reflected in our confidence survey that we saw yesterday, and all those things add up and have been reflected in our terms of trade. That's the economic indicator that we had today. So prices the prices for exports fell more than the market was expecting, while the prices for imports, I think, fell also more. So and that was interesting because it was oil on the import side, so that saw prices fall. And on the export side, it was milk.
Okay.
And yeah,
Right.
so that's what we got as usual.
No, last night we talked about Cameron Baggery, the ANZ. I think Kiwibank have come out today and also said the OCR's got to go down, What's happening? What are they doing in Australia? What's their central bank doing?
Well, okay, so the Reserve Bank of Australia came out with their announcement today, and they're holding their interest rates at record low. They haven't changed them, and they're not going to at this stage. In fact, they say that there is room for easing, but again, just like our Reserve Bank, it depends on all the factors that have been governing the movements in the stock exchange, and oil prices, the same story. Conflicting data in the U.S. economy once again. So there's still a lot of uncertainty, and the conservative thinking is, let's just leave things alone. The G20 did acknowledge at their meeting with the G20, the central bankers and finance ministers, that the central bank governors aren't making much of a change anyway. So what the heck? Just leave it alone, right?
What do the markets do?
Well, the New Zealand top 50 index rose 0.8%. So that was a little bit of a tick up. That was 50 points to 6,281. And the New Zealand dollar hardly moved despite all of the disruptions out there, trading around 66 US cents and 92.5 Australian.
Nona Peltier, our Auckland business reporter. Thanks so much, Nona. See you tomorrow. We're standing by for Anne Tolley to talk about cracking down on gangs. But first, the government may be forced to change its plans to amend employment laws in order to get the support it needs to get this legislation through Parliament. The Labor Party says it would be willing to support changes if the bill can be altered to deal with 0 hours contracts. National needs at least one MP from another party to support the bill, in addition to ACT, who of course is just David Seymour. Here's our political editor, Chris Bramwell.
The Employment Standards legislation bill would extend paid parental leave to 18 weeks and would also mean employers wouldn't be able to cancel shifts without giving plenty of notice. If they failed to do this, they would have to pay their workers compensation. Labor's leader Andrew Little says he's been in talks with the government about the bill and will support it at second reading, but further changes need to be made to secure Labor's full backing.
The rules around availability and short notice termination of offers of short-term work, those are the areas that we were concerned about. The original legislation looked like it was entrenching the worst aspects of 0 hours contracts rather than fixing them, and so providing the fixes are there, then we can support the legislation.
The Māori Party co-leader Marama Fox says her party is still mulling over whether it will support the changes. She says it's also worried about 0 hour contracts.
It's about the capacity of someone on 0 hours under those current recommendations to be able to advocate for themselves if they have to go to a court to do that. These are people who probably may not have the capacity or the wherewithal to be able to, 1, afford to go to court, 2, to take it up with their employer. So that immediately puts them at a disadvantage.
The United Future leader Peter Dunn says he'll back the bill at second reading, but ongoing support would depend on the outcome of discussions. The Workplace Relations Minister Michael Woodhouse says he's willing to listen to good ideas that will improve the bill.
I think the bill came out of Select Committee in very good shape. I'm confident we've got the numbers to get it through this month. Even with our minor parties, they need to take it to their caucuses, obviously. But I've had an approach from a couple of people about how they could be improved in a small way, and I'm considering that.
The Green Party was the only party to vote against the legislation at first reading, but the party's workplace relations spokesperson Denise Roach says that could change.
We haven't actually seen what the Minister has come up with in terms of the 0 hour contracts. If there's a guaranteed hours, or if it actually outright bans 0 hour contracts, then we'd look at supporting it.
The bill needs to be passed in time to meet the April the 1st deadline for the extension of paid parental leave. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Chris Bramwell.
The government is pushing ahead with a crackdown on gangs, saying up to 7,000 children are estimated to have a gang member as a parent. A new gang intelligence centre will link several state agencies, and there'll be attempts to dissuade children from taking up the gang way of life. A new report from the Ministry of Social Development estimates the long-term cost to the taxpayer of gang members and their children through their contact with the Ministry of Child, Youth and Family is $714 million. Social Development Minister Anne Tolley is on the line from Wellington. Minister, welcome to the program.
Nice to be here.
Well,
nice to hear your dulcet tones.
Dulcet. Well, I'll try and perk them up. But let's perk them up with Dennis O'Reilly, who Black Power, big history of studying gangs, huge insight into how they work, and he's congratulating you off the bat for carrot and stick. We'll talk about the stick in a moment. Where's the carrot in this policy?
Well, what we're saying is, we've been trying to arrest our way out of the gang culture for generations, and it hasn't worked. Actually, gang life is really dangerous for women and children, and these stats show, how many of them are involved in violence in their lives. So what we've got to do is work at the grassroots. We've got to work in those families. We've got to make sure that they've got good support to make sure the kids are getting to school, that they're attending regularly, that there's work available where it's wanted, and there's good social support.
How do you do that?
Well, that's why we're doing a couple of trials. So they're quite different. Each one of them is quite different. One is community-driven, and one is a contract, to an individual or a group of individuals to work one-on-one. Both of them are getting in at the grassroots with gang families who want to change.
Okay, what about those who don't want to change? I want to go to the second last paragraph in your media release. It says, you're talking about the MSD, and you say it will then adopt a stronger compliance approach with those parents who persistently fail to meet their social obligations, ensuring their children are accessing health and education services and stuff. How do you do that without further punishing the children?
Well, that's right. So we've got to be very careful, but we do have, through our welfare system, obligations, social obligations. So parents who are receiving benefits have to have their children registered with an ECE provider, or they have to have them attending school regularly. So they're going to be asked those sorts of questions, and the staff are going to be pointing out to those families that if they don't comply with the obligations, then they risk having their benefits cut. Now remember, no one with a benefit can have it cut more than 50%.
Absolutely, but if I look at your facts, 27% of gang members were recorded by CIF as the alleged perpetrators of abuse or neglect of children. That's a terrible statistic, 1 in 4.
It is.
If you cut benefits, if you put more pressure on households, doesn't that exacerbate that?
Yes, and that might not be the only solution. So it might be a referral to a children's team if we've got a children's team in that area, or it could be a referral through to CIF to see if we can get some support into that family. So there's a number of ways that we can do this, and I know we've got very good staff at Work and Income, and they're starting some training now. And the most important thing is, how do you identify these families? Because it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And once you've identified them, it's not easy to do anything about it. And I wonder if there's a disconnect between a policy which is entirely well-meaning and the implementation of it, which looks on the face of it, if you'll forgive the English, bloody difficult.
Well, that doesn't mean you don't try and do it. And that's why we're doing some trials to see, whether we can find ways through this quite complex intergenerational issues and find ways that are successful. Now, one of the other initiatives that we have is, of course, the 3K to Christchurch, and we've made gang membership a criteria for that. So we've already had a couple who want to get right away from the gang environment take up those offers. So it is difficult. It's not going to be a quick fix, but we're determined to make a difference because, as you say, it is not acceptable that so many children, and I have to say so many women, are the victims of gang life.
Anne Tolley, Social Development Minister, joining us live on the phone from Wellington. Thank you for your time. Let's go to Fiji now, where Radio New Zealand international reporter Alex Perrottet is the first journalist to reach Vanuatu, the third largest island, Fiji's Lau archipelago, where 5 people lost their life on this island. I think, Alex, you travelled there with Vodafone today. What did you find?
Well, John, coming down to land, I knew I was going to find something horrific. Koto Island we passed by. It's just a scorched earth. Yeah, I don't know if you can see up into the hills, but it's just gone. I mean, I would show you worse pictures, but I'm right here at the Vodafone hub. It's the only place to get Wi-Fi, and I've just got a dog here joining me, so be patient with us. I might just move it back a little bit out of his reach. Okay, this is a Fiji village like any other. Well, to a sad story, really. Luciani Sotia, I've spoken to her, and her son died and she survived. Another man, a hero really, in the village, had brought another elderly lady into their house. It was a concrete house, a good sturdy one. It collapsed on all of them, and Luciana, I've just spoken to her in the hospital, she survived miraculously. The others passed away, so very, very unfortunate indeed. But stories like that, obviously only 5 died here, more died in other places, but I can tell you every family has a story. 40 houses gone in Marava village, that's the village of the former Prime Minister, Laiseni Ngarase. The whole island here is just struggling to cope with what's happened.
Alex, we should point out for people listening that dog is that friendly barks. He's delighted to see you, right? But what people who are listening can't see is that hill behind you. That has just been clear-felled. It actually looks as if a fire's gone through there. So these islands, whilst there's concrete structures standing, the devastation is just absolute, isn't it?
Yes, look, I'm sorry, John. It's a very thin Wi-Fi cable here, and I couldn't quite hear the question. But I can tell you, there's heaps going on here in terms of aid, because right behind me here is a primary school that's been very damaged, and the army is based here as well as the disaster management people, and it's a hospital. So this is really the hub on Vanuatu. It's Loma village. This is where everyone's coming in and going out. They said hundreds of people came through here for treatment. And as we were saying before, we had those people that sadly passed away as well. The HMNZS Wellington has been passed, and we do have troops here, and I've been speaking to them. There's certainly mountains and mountains of aid coming in now. I flew in with a whole lot from Vodafone, and it doesn't take much to put smiles on these Fijians' faces, I can tell you.
Alex Perrottet, live from the island of Vanuatu. Thank you so much, Alex. We really appreciate your time. It is 13 minutes to 6. If the polls are to be believed, tomorrow, Super Tuesday in the US, Donald Trump will take home the Republican vote in, wait for this, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Arkansas, Massachusetts, Oklahoma and Vermont. Comedian John Oliver said yesterday it was no longer wise to ignore the Trump. It is time to stop thinking about the mascot and start thinking of the man. Well, McKay Coppins is a political editor at BuzzFeed and the author of The Wilderness, a book about the battle for the Republican nomination. I asked him whether, like former President George W. Bush before him, every gaffe or blunder or rush of blood to the head simply makes him more appealing to the disconnected, alienated, working class, blue-collar voter.
I do, especially because Trump's entire message over the past year and his kind of entire campaign has been built around this idea that he is the, number one enemy of the political establishment, of the corporate cronies, of the corrupt elites who are ruining the lives of average American workers. There's this idea that Trump has pushed in every speech, every interview he's given, where he basically says that the reason the media attacks me, the reason the politicians attack me is because they're scared of me, because they know I'm the only one who can really, tear down the establishment and fight for the little guy. And so we've gotten into this vicious cycle, and it's been happening for months, where every time he says something that is, preposterous or outlandish or blatantly false, and, journalists or Republican leaders or whoever kind of pounce to point out the ridiculousness of what he said, it only strengthens his message. So we basically have gone to a situation where we are effectively in the news media running his campaign for him unwittingly. And it's something that as a political journalist, I actually struggle with, because I feel like it's my job, and I think we all feel this way. It's our job to aggressively cover him and prosecute him. But at the same time, there doesn't seem to be a way to do that without just helping him with his supporters.
And then you have a whole lot of people who are working hard, who don't really understand, for example, the GFC and the causes and consequences, and just feel disenfranchised and just feel like they're struggling. And there is a big, loud guy standing up and screaming at the establishment. So even if what Trump is saying is nonsense, he is kind of a mouthpiece for the disconnection they're feeling, right?
Oh, absolutely. And this is the thing that I think a lot of people miss, and it's easy to miss when you're looking at the Trump phenomenon. There is a deep-rooted anxiety that has gripped much of the white working class in America for legitimate reasons. Basically through the story of the Obama era, and frankly the last few years of the Bush era, has been one of middle-class decline, of increasing personal debt, of bailouts for big companies, gridlock in Washington. There are obviously any number of reasons for voters to feel disenfranchised, to feel frustrated, to feel angry. The problem is that, and there's been some good writing and reporting on this recently, the problem is that the response from these voters is kind of in a natural, almost visceral way to kind of send a bunch of outsiders or angry insurgents into Washington to fix the problem, right? You say the people there don't know what they're doing. We're going to send people like Donald Trump in to fix things. And of course, they don't know what they're doing. They don't have any experience in policymaking. They don't have any experience in legislating. It causes more gridlock. The incentives are incredibly perverse. It doesn't fix any problems. And then that only leads to more anger and frustration with the political establishment. Donald Trump is in a lot of ways kind of the culmination of years and years of this kind of, very aggressive, angry attitude toward the political establishment and toward politics in general. And it stands to reason that somebody like Trump would gain traction with people who are feeling frustrated. The problem is just that, the political establishment in a lot of ways has brought this on itself.
Yeah.
And that includes the media, too. I mean, there have been a lot of institutional failures over the past decade. And so it's hard for them to then come in and say, no, don't, trust us. This Trump guy is no good. We can fix your problems.
This is a wonderful piece of writing that you've done in BuzzFeed, Why America Can't Stop Watching Donald Trump. There's one beautiful anecdote of people who are queuing up to see Trump, and they snake into a queue of people waiting to see Cirque du Soleil, and a whole lot of people who are waiting to see Cirque du Soleil decide they'd rather see Trump instead. I mean, it's beautifully revealing, and it's fantastically told. But can a man who operates on the level of a circus actually become the president of America? Is it time that everyone started taking that prospect really seriously? Can he do it?
Yes, we are at the point where that needs to be taken seriously. I have to say, I was one of the reporters, political analysts who spent 6 months saying there's no possible way he ever becomes the nominee. This guy's a carnival barker, he's a sideshow. He has shown definitively over the past month that he is capable of winning primaries, of winning races. And frankly, I would go a step further. Not only could he be the Republican nominee, I'm not convinced he couldn't become the president. I think he could in November win the general election. That's a frightening prospect for a lot of people, both Republicans, Democrats, and between in this country. And I think that it's really time to grapple, the political establishment, the media, everybody, the world, frankly, grapples with that possibility and figures out what they have to do in response to that reality. Because we can't just pretend like this is a sideshow anymore. It's not. This is happening. It's a nightmare maybe, but we are living it, and we have to, I think, kind of grapple with the reality of it.
McKay Coppins from BuzzFeed. An owner of a commercial cleaning company says some businesses will find it tough to cover the increased costs incurred by the rise in the minimum wage. The adult minimum hourly wage will rise 50 cents to $15.25 from April 1st, and some companies are wondering where they'll find the money. Gemma Brackybush reports.
Business owner Dominic Drum is also the president of Building Service Contractors, which represents employers of 60% of the cleaning workforce, or 20,000 people. Cleaners employed by those companies receive a minimum of $15.10 an hour, which is above the current minimum wage because of a collective agreement. But Mr Drum says the latest increase will be especially hard on small to medium-sized companies like his.
I have roughly 100 staff on my books, and it's going to cost me around about $25,000 extra in wages a year. And it's a low-margin industry, so as a small business owner, I can't absorb that. And so I'm going to have to talk to my clients and customers and look at options around passing that cost on.
Dominic Drum says companies were surprised at the 3.4% rise because the rate of inflation is so low, currently sitting at 0.1%. He says companies need to be frank with clients about the increases.
We can just pass this cost straight on to you, and obviously in their own business they might have to pass that cost on to their customers. But what also can happen is that if the customer's not in a position to accept that increase, possibly what you could do is reduce the spec of the clean, the hours that your cleaners spend on their site.
The Workplace Relations Minister Michael Woodhouse says the rise will cost large companies a lot, but insists the government has struck the right balance.
We've got people on the left who say that we didn't do enough and the minimum wage should be higher. We've got others saying it's too high. I think we've landed in about the right place. We've been very careful to make sure that jobs aren't affected by this, but we were also cognisant of the costs on business.
The Labour Party leader has little sympathy for companies like Dominic Drum's. Andrew Little says even the new minimum wage is far too low.
The reality is there is no one who could survive on $15.25 an hour, even on a full week of work. It's simply not enough to have a decent life on, and I defy anybody to tell me that that's a perfect acceptable income. And I bet the person from the cleaning industry who said that is an income considerably higher than $15.25 an hour.
Dominic Drum says building service contractors are committed to paying more than the minimum wage and will renegotiate the collective agreement next month. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Gemma Brackybush.
Merete Sinotti is a cleaner at Parliament. She works the night shift, earns $15.10 an hour, just over the current minimum wage of $14.75, but just shy of the newly announced rate of $15.25. Merete is also a single mother of two and says she struggles to make ends meet.
It's not enough. Standard of living here in New Zealand, it's not enough.
So how many hours do you work a week?
40 hours.
And so how much do you earn in the hand a week?
$15.10 I'm getting after tax, $477 a week.
So, Merete, you get $470 a week in the hand. How much is your rent?
$305.
$305?
Yeah.
So that leaves you with about $160, $170 a week to live on?
Yes.
For everything?
Yeah.
For food?
Yes, and food and my fare and my kids' fare is $90 a week.
Merete says she recently got a car repair bill of $750, which she can't afford. She says she plans to ask work and income for a loan and hopes to pay it back at $5 or $10 a week.
My daughter this year started in Secretariat to buy the $799 of laptop. My son need a calculator of $1,800. I can't afford it. And then he said to me, Mom, I can use my phone one.
So your daughter needed a laptop. Could you afford that, Merete?
Now, she already buy. She asked for the student allowance to buy for her, and she's going to pay back.
So how tough is your life on $15.10 an hour?
Yeah, it's very hard to live on because, the food, even my kids are teenager, they're eating food, healthy food because they are teenager. And yeah, it's very hard. Even though I can't buy anything, I just go to second-hand shop, buy my shoes, buy my clothes, everything from second-hand. Yeah, I never buy the.
Rere Sanotu, who is a cleaner at Parliament, earning $15.10 an hour, just above the current minimum wage. I'm sorry we lost the end of that interview. She was about to describe having to buy a new pair of school shoes for her son. Lots of feedback coming in on Katruda. How hard-nosed is that Pharmac attitude? Basically, they seem to be saying not as many people die of advanced melanoma as maybe some other cancer, or say heart issues, and so they're not giving the people with melanoma anything new and useful. It's disgusting, really, says Martin. But Cliff says, if Pharmac's budget is fixed and finite, which group of people do the melanoma sufferers who want their expensive drugs funded think they should have their funding cut? What does $20 million buy in the context of other treatments? And then John says, he calls himself Dr. John. Hi, John, 100 cases at a cost of $10,000 per month is 20 cents per Kiwi. I pledge my 20 cents now. So as you can see, the feedback is very varied. We have worse rates of cancer survival than Australia and other countries. Is that because Pharmac is handing out tickets on stagecoaches when high-speed trains are available? Thank you all for your feedback. And one person says, what an amazing, articulate woman Lisa is. Go girl. Kia ora everyone, you are listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. It's great to have your company. We have half an hour left in the program tonight. We're going to hear from our health correspondent about Katruda. We're going to hear from people who were at Parliament today presenting that petition. Lots more coming up. And the Breakers, they're in Perth for their 4th basketball grand final series in 5 years. We're going to be joined on the line by star player Tom Abercrombie. They're playing tomorrow. They're talking to us tonight. There aren't many international sporting teams that are as accessible as the Breakers. Good sports. Will they win? Let's talk about it with Tom Abercrombie. But first, the news with Leilani Mamoisia.
Kia ora, good evening. Patients with advanced melanoma have told the government they need the drug Keytruda and they need it soon. At least 40 patients and their families presented a petition to the Health Minister at Parliament demanding funded access to the hotly debated drug. Our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
A petition signed by 11,085 people was presented to Jonathan Coleman by patient Lisa Renwick. She said the journey to Wellington was hard for some of them, but they had done it out of desperation and were fighting for their lives. She urged Dr. Coleman to take their message to Cabinet and fund Keytruda for all the patients who need it. Dr. Coleman said discussions are taking place to boost the health budget, which could ensure more money for the drug buying agency Pharmac, and said he believes a funded treatment is on the way. This is Karen Brown.
The Minister of Police and Corrections says new policies on gangs are intended to stop the children of gang members following the actions of their parents. The government has launched a multi-pronged attack on gangs, seeking to gather more information and tackle drugs, illegal gains and firearms. But it also aims to break gang membership, continuing on from one generation to the next, which Judith Collins says is a big problem.
If you have a look at some of the gang families, you can see those generations are coming around very quickly. If you look at the people in jail, they are almost invariably victims of family violence themselves. That's what breeds violence. There are lots of victims of family violence who don't go on to become perpetrators, but in gangs, they invariably will.
Judith Collins says the program will try to help people who want out of gang life. A woman who was shot by a masked gunman at the Ashburton Work and Income Office has told a jury she played dead so he wouldn't shoot her again. Russell Tully is on trial for the murders of Peggy Noble and Lee Cleveland and the attempted murder of their 2 colleagues at the Ashburton Work and Income Office in 2014. Sally Murphy was at the High Court in Christchurch.
Lindy Curtis was emotional as she recalled the gunman standing in front of her as she lay under her desk. She said the gunman shot her in the leg and she thought he would shoot her again to finish her off, so she played dead. The court also heard from David Coos, who was talking to the receptionist Peggy Noble when she was shot. Once the shooter left the building, he confronted him, ignoring warnings that he would be shot if he didn't back off. The trial continues tomorrow. In Christchurch, Sally Murphy.
The Māori Party says it is still deciding whether it will support the government's planned employment law changes. The Employment Standards legislation bill would extend paid parental leave to 18 weeks, and employers would have to give plenty of notice before cancelling shifts or face paying compensation. The government is in talks with Labour, United Future and the Māori Party over their support for the bill. The Māori Party co-leader Marama Fox says her party is worried about zero-hour contracts and whether people on them can advocate for themselves.
They have to go to a court to do that. These are people who probably may not have the capacity or the wherewithal to be able to, 1, afford to go to court, 2, to take it up with their employer, so that immediately puts them at a disadvantage.
The Māori Party co-leader Marama Fox. A survivor of abuse by Catholic clergy, Philip Nagel, says he's astounded that Australia's highest-ranked Catholic Cardinal, George Pell, appears to have been the only person in the Ballarat diocese not to know about paedophile priest Gerald Ridsdale. Mr Nagel is in Rome, where the Cardinal today said he attended a meeting that discussed moving Ridsdale between parishes, but can't remember what reasons were given. Philip Nagel says Cardinal Pell's version of events is unbelievable.
Cardinal Pell is a very astute and a very bright man, so how can he say he didn't know? And he is the one putting the accusations back on his superiors that they lied and deceived him.
Philip Nagel says he's watching the Cardinal give evidence to an abuse inquiry to honour the dozen classmates from a class of 33 who have committed suicide or died prematurely after being abused. And to sports now, the All Blacks winger Waisake Naholo has been warned off returning home to Fiji to seek traditional treatment after suffering another fractured leg. Naholo suffered the injury late in the Highlanders' narrow loss to the Blues in their Super Rugby season opener on Friday night. Here's our sports editor, Stephen Hewson.
Waisake Naholo could be out for up to 2 months, having fractured the same leg he injured before the World Cup last year. However, team doctor Greg McLeod says the latest injury is not as bad as last year's one, and Naholo is expected to recover in 6 to 8 weeks. In a statement, the Highlanders added that Naholo wouldn't be returning home to Fiji for alternative treatment, as he did ahead of the World Cup last year, and McLeod will monitor Naholo's recovery in Dunedin. The Highlanders have also lost Japanese international halfback Fumiaki Tanaka for a month, as he suffered a calf injury at training last week. This is Stephen Hewson.
The Warriors' star signings, Roger Tuivasa-Sheck and Isaac Luke, will make their debut in the opening round of the National Rugby League competition this weekend. Meanwhile, Mitchell Pearce has officially been stood down as Sydney Roosters co-captain and suspended as the NRL club considers what action to take next over his drunken escapades, where he was filmed simulating a lewd act with a dog. And the New Zealand women's hockey team has beaten Argentina 4-1 in Mar del Plata to take a 2-1 lead in the 6-match series between the two sides. And that's the news.
Dirty politics?
Is Simon Luck's running my campaign? Yes, he is. And I made it quite clear that I don't want any bad press. I just want to tell my story.
Accountability?
By standing back like Pontius Pilate and washing his hands of the affair, he's condemning people to die and to die fast.
And here comes Super Tuesday.
Colorado, Minnesota, Virginia, they're swing states. And Virginia's a real key.
Decision and Debate, Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, what Australia's most senior Catholic, Cardinal George Pell, had to say in his second day of evidence to the Royal Commission on child sex abuse in the Catholic Church. And after 10, we meet John Pepper, who astounded the experts by overcoming his Parkinson's symptoms using a form of conscious control. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And the Met Service weather till midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, scattered showers, clearing from the south tomorrow and becoming mostly fine. Bay of Plenty's fine tomorrow. Waikato to Taranaki, also Taupo and Taumaranui, fine and cloudy periods, isolated afternoon and evening showers tomorrow about Waikato and Taumaranui. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, patchy rain or drizzle clearing south of Wairoa by midday tomorrow and easing to isolated showers further north. Wanganui to Wellington, also Taihape and Wairarapa, cloud about Wellington and Wairarapa clearing tomorrow morning. Marlborough and Canterbury, cloudy periods with patchy drizzle overnight. And the remainder of the South Islands mainly fine, but isolated light showers about the south coast. Chatham Islands, there's cloudy periods and a few showers. And it's 6:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Leilani. Have a lovely evening and see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Leilani Mamoisa with the news. Patients with advanced melanoma told the government today they will die without a promised new drug. And they say it must be funded now. The patients presented a petition signed by 11,000 people to the Health Minister calling for the drug Keytruda to be funded. Our health correspondent Karen Brown was there and she filed this report.
The petition, signed by 11,085 people, was presented to the Health Minister, Jonathan Coleman, by a Tauranga-based patient with advanced melanoma that's now in remission, Lisa Renwick. She thanked Dr Coleman for meeting them and told him the petition had arisen out of a sense of desperation on the part of patients.
Because in this country, which has the highest rate of melanoma in the world, this country which claims to offer the security of free healthcare for all New Zealanders, those of us with melanoma and our families are expendable.
Mrs Renwick has funded much of her own Keytruda, also known as pembrolizumab, but told Dr Coleman not everyone can do that.
Only those with the means to pay can access medicines that save our lives. The wealthy are offered treatment and the poor are sent home to die. And that's a fact.
She also told Dr Coleman and others outside Parliament that no doubt he expected them to go away after today, but she said that would not happen.
We can't go away because the fight for your life is a desperate one. And people look at me and they see what these medicines have done for me, and of course they want the same thing for their families.
A Karori man who also has advanced melanoma, Graham Oswald, who was in the crowd, says he pays to fly to Auckland every 3 weeks for an infusion of Keytruda at a private clinic.
6 months ago I had my first infusion and it started to work from the very first infusion. So 2 weeks to the day after, and it's improved. Since I was stage 4 for melanoma for about 18 months. I wouldn't have been here if I hadn't got onto it.
The Health Minister Jonathan Coleman told Mrs Renwick and others their voice had been heard.
If we can get more money into health for the next budget, we can actually make sure that Pharmac has more money and then they have options around funding a treatment for melanoma. So I believe a funded treatment is on the way.
He said it is likely that some sort of melanoma treatment will be funded, but Pharmac has to work out which is the best one at the best price.
I think, we are going to see something funded before too long, and I totally understand your sentiment that, there's not a moment to waste, and I know that this is something which people feel very strongly about.
Labour's health spokesperson Annette King said Pharmac, an independent Crown agency, will nevertheless be told to fund Keytruda.
What you're hearing from the Minister is smoke and mirrors. They will put money in, they will tell Pharmac to fund one of these drugs and get the best price they can, which they ought to. I have no doubt that that's what will happen.
Patients said they were pleased at the response to the petition and while they want action now, realise they may continue waiting. For Checkpoint, Karen Brown.
Well, also there today to support the handing over of the petition was Joy Cole, diagnosed with stage 4 melanoma last September and given between 6 months and 12 months to live. She and her husband Jeff, who live in Porirua, are in their 70s.
What I've got, chemotherapy was basically only palliative, and it wouldn't really be any help, and it's likely to have so many after effects that I'm better off to be well as I am at the moment. So I've developed a cough, which is getting worse, but other than that, I'm keeping on and trying to be positive.
So Joy, just to clarify, your oncologist told you there was nothing for you in the public health system. There was nothing you could be given at present. Was that what you were told?
That's correct. She said that if we could fund it, that Keytruda was available and I'd have to go to Auckland for it. if we could find the money. And other than that, there is a possibility of maybe some other drugs in the future, but she wasn't quite certain when that was going to be available.
Can you fund Keytruda?
If we do, it's going to run us dry for everything that we wanted to do. So, can we fund Keytruda?
It'll be a struggle, but we'll do it.
It's a struggle, but we'll do it.
No choice.
If I want to be around this time next year, then we have to find the money from somewhere. So that's our alternative.
And so you have to find the money, you have to pay for the treatment yourself, and you have to come to Auckland to do it.
Yes, that's correct.
Joy, how much have you been told the Keytruda treatment is going to cost you?
200 to 300,000, 100,000, yes. Is that right? Yes.
And where are you going to find the money?
And it's an awful... Well, we'll just have to find it from somewhere, and if we've got to take a mortgage on the house, so be it. But I've got an awful lot of life I want to still live, so we've got no choice, really.
6:15 on Checkpoint. Let's go to the medical director of the Cancer Society. Chris Jackson is also an oncologist, and he joins us now live on the phone from Dunedin. You in Dunedin there, Chris?
G'day, John. Yes, I am.
Well, thank you. Well, welcome to Checkpoint. Can we be as dispassionate as humanly possible in these circumstances and talk about the science? And I want to compare the carbazine, which is the chemotherapy treatment that Pharmac now funds, with Keytruda. Which would you rather prescribe, all things being equal, for a stage 4 melanoma patient?
No contest.
No contest. So say it. Which would you rather prescribe?
Well, it's obvious. There's absolutely no comparison, John. Chemotherapy has never been shown to extend life expectancy in any clinical trial ever, and Keytruda and its near-identical competitor nivolumab are just light years ahead. Now, there are 3 or 4 effective melanoma drugs, and the petition today is about getting the best of the bunch, pembrolizumab, across the line. And even if this happens, we're still several drugs behind Australia, Canada, the UK, and so on.
So wait a minute. At the moment, in your armoury is a drug that is simply not effective. In fact, that's what Pharmac itself says.
That's right.
The chemotherapy that you have to prescribe to people won't make a difference to them.
Well, it's never been shown in any clinical study to extend life. There are occasional patients whom, being aware of the limitations of the data, do elect to have a trial of chemotherapy, but the side effects are significant. You lose your hair, you can have immune system compromise, you can get nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, fatigue, etc. And the clinical studies head-to-head comparing nivolumab, the copycat drug to Pembro, clearly shows lower rates of hospitalisation than chemotherapy, clearly shows fewer side effects, clearly shows major improvements in life expectancy compared to the treatments that we have available. So there's just no comparison.
So nivolumab and Keytruda, Pembro, as you call it, so the Pepsi and Coke, so they're that similar, are they?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Are they worth the money? And can you answer that both as an oncologist and also as a taxpayer?
Well, I think that's a very difficult question to answer for a number of reasons. Number one, we don't know the price that Pharmac have been offered, so it's hard to do the cost-effectiveness analysis when you don't know the cost side of that equation. And in terms of value, people put different value on different things. There are some people whom would certainly value an additional 3, 6, 9, 12 months of life, and other people whom would prefer to use that money to perhaps spend time with family or go on a holiday together. And people make different decisions based on their own unique circumstances. But we are talking about 2 slightly different things here. You're asking me as a clinician, is the drug good enough to recommend to patients? And is this the drug that I say to patients is the most effective for them? And the answer to that is absolutely and utterly yes. Is this drug the single best investment of the government's money across the entirety of the health budget? I can't answer that.
Okay, but the first point, absolutely and utterly yes, you are that singular with that answer.
Well, in terms of the data that we have at the moment, with all its limitations, it's clearly the best of the bunch for most people in most circumstances. You can't say for every patient in every circumstance that this is the only and the best treatment for them, because there are some circumstances where it's not right. They may have other medical conditions where it's the wrong drug for them. But for the majority of patients, the anti-PD-1 drugs, Nivo and Pembro, are the best that we have available.
Chris Jackson, Medical Director of the Cancer Society and oncologist, thank you for your time this evening. It's 90 minutes past 6. For the third time in the last 5 years, the New Zealand Breakers play the Perth Wildcats to decide the Australasian NBL champs in a best-of-3 series that opens at Perth Arena tomorrow night, 11:30 New Zealand time. They'll return for a game 2 on the North Shore in Auckland on Friday. It's an extraordinary. They play Wednesday night Perth, Friday night Auckland. Tom Abercrombie will be the starting small forward for the Breakers as he and the club chase their 5th NBL title in the last 6 seasons. He's extraordinary. He's in pretty handy form too, coming off a 23-point explosion in the closeout semi-final against Melbourne, and as ever, his contribution at both ends of the court will be absolutely vital for the Breakers. Tom joins us now from Perth. Tom, I have to say there aren't too many leading New Zealand sports teams where the players would talk to you on the eve of the game. Is this because you are just used to this now? You've played so many finals that you're just thinking, whatever, bring it on.
Oh, I don't know. We've got a bit of time to fill in over in Perth here, so it's always nice to have a chat to someone back home.
Well, it's lovely to talk to you. Welcome to the program. You've played these guys a bit. It's a physical game against Perth, isn't it?
Yeah, it always is. Us two teams, there's not too many secrets out there. We've played each other a lot over the years, and we've managed to keep a lot of those same players around for that amount of time as well. So, we know each other pretty well. We know the style we like to play, and it's quite similar in a lot of ways. We both like that physical style, so it always seems to make for a pretty exciting matchup every time we play them.
The last time you played a grand final there in Perth in 2012, you cut the nets down. Do you think they remember that?
I'm sure they do. It's not something you forget in a hurry, but it's a fun place to play, and especially in finals time as well. The crowd over here is unbelievable. They have 12,000 people. It's an amazing stadium, so it's a really fun place to play. And anytime you get a big crowd like that, it's even better to try and shut them up a little bit.
Tom, this finals run you're on, 9 straight victories, 9 straight series victories, 11 playoff victories in a row. That is extraordinary. How much does that momentum and confidence help?
Yeah, no, it's a pretty amazing stat when we go back and think about it. It's not something that, as a team that we're really conscious of as we've been going through it, but those sort of things are just a result of the process that we put in place, and we're always a team that's just focused on each game as it comes, and we've done a really good job of that in these playoffs, and not getting too far ahead of ourselves. But we played some really good basketball in the semi-finals, and then we're able to sweep Melbourne, and hopefully we can continue that momentum onto Perth. But they're in the final for a reason. It's going to be a very tough series.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough series. And also the other thing that's tough about it is how physically demanding it is. You play Perth Wednesday night, Auckland Friday night. Now, I know both teams have to do that, but that is just off the scale in terms of what's required getting home. It's a long flight. Are you exhausted by Friday?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get much tougher than that, but it's a great test for us, I guess, physically and mentally, to try and come back and play a game 2 days after travelling that amount of distance. So, like you said, it's the same for both teams, and we can't change it now. And would we like to be different? Sure, I'm sure both teams would, but we just have to show that mental toughness, which has been a great trait of this team over the years, and try and put that out of our minds. But our main focus is on trying to get this first game over here. If we can win on Perth's floor, it puts us in a really good position, and that's the big one for us right now.
Good luck, Tom Abercrombie, and thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. Tom Abercrombie, Breakers player, live from Perth. They're playing at 11:30 New Zealand time tomorrow night. Let's go to Pakistan. A dozen girls in a volatile part of Karachi are learning to box in a dilapidated boxing club in the hope of bringing a medal home for Pakistan. Here's Katie Sargent from Reuters.
This nondescript building in a volatile neighborhood in Karachi, Pakistan, is the training ground for some potential boxing champions. These are the boxers, girls aged 8 to 17. After some simple warm-ups, they get down to serious training. 15-year-old Aruj Kambrani says she's been training since childhood, and God willing, she says she will become a national as well as an international boxer. Her father is the coach. He says the growth of the sport for both men and women in Pakistan has been hampered by a lack of equipment and adequate facilities, but says the situation is slowly improving. He founded the boxing club in 1992 and sees boxing as a path to more opportunity for the girls.
Our country's progress and our girls' progress lies in getting equal opportunities so that they can move forward shoulder to shoulder with men. Only then is progress possible. So my wish was that the girls should come out into the open.
They were out in the open at this recent practice match, looking right at home in tracksuits, boxing gloves and headscarves, showing off the skills honed by hours in the gym.
It's a lovely story. Katie Sargent from Reuters. Coming up on World Watch PM at 6:30 with John Greaves, major fears an Iraqi dam may burst, imperiling nearly 1.5 million people, and 10 children are stabbed outside a primary school. Right, let's end tonight with something rather wonderful. You're going out for dinner, but how do you split the bill? According to who had what, or who invited whom, or... Well, what about how much systemic privilege you suffer or enjoy? That's the premise of comedian Luna Malbrock's new app, Equitable, which satirises the wage gap by splitting the cheque with adjustments for race, gender, and even whether or not you're the middle child. Now, she joined us from San Francisco. She's an African-American woman and young. I'm a white middle-aged dude. I asked her how we'd split the bill if we went out for a meal.
That's a great question. So, I know you're in New Zealand, so I'm not sure how the numbers shake out there, but let's say we were dining in America and you were a U.S. male, I would only pay 64% of, like, my half of the bill, of, like, let's say we split it in half, and I'd pay 64% of that, and you would pay a little bit more the other way around. So it kind of shakes out that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And the thing is, I reckon if we were having dinner together, I'd want to go to a more expensive restaurant than you because you're younger. You know, you're a comedian. We all know that you live on the smell of an oily rag, don't you comedians? So I'd be saying, let's go and eat somewhere really expensive and drink fancy wine. You'd be going, no.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's accounting for that too. So when you think about that, you think about you could probably afford a few more things more than I can. So it's a playful way of thinking about a different way that we can adjust bills when we go out to eat.
It's interesting that you have to do this, isn't it? Because this is fun and I'm enjoying it enormously on that level. But why do you have to remind people? Why do you have to do this to remind people about gender inequity and pay levels? Isn't that just a truth we should simply understand?
You know, John, it's been quite surprising to me how many people still don't believe that the wage gap based on gender or racial inequity exists, even though we have hard numbers and hard facts to back it up. So I'm a comedian by night, but also by day. I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, I've been a social worker, so I've been always told to like go where people are. And people love apps, and so I thought if you can actually play around with it and see the numbers in action, see how it actually shake up if you're actually paying something compared to what you get paid, then it might be a more tangible way for people to understand something that, you know, it's easy to understand, it seems to some, but some people are having a really hard time with it.
Have you noticed the gender difference in the responses? In other words, a woman saying to you, Luna, I knew that already, and a man going, oh, wow.
I think overwhelmingly, I've had really positive responses from many different genders, but I have seen more men, particularly white men, get a little upset about it in the United States. I don't know what's going on in New Zealand, but you seem really awesome. You seem happy about it.
So, what happens in a perfect world? Because boy, oh boy, I remember having these discussions when I first entered journalism, you know, which is a long, long time ago. How on earth do we close the gap so that when you and I go out to dinner, we can afford to pay the same amount?
I think that's an interesting question because the fun thing about creating this app, one, it's comedy. It's comedic in nature. It's satirical, but it got me thinking, and I hope it gets more people thinking too. Like, maybe we should be a little bit more curious about different ways of closing the gap instead of waiting on some top-down approach of thinking of little ways that we can all kind of be aware of bias, be aware of discrimination based on gender, and maybe account for that in our daily lives in different ways. And it could be as simple as, checking your bias when you're looking at how much you're paying people in your organization, or it could be paying a little bit more to make up for something. So I think if everyone kind of takes baby steps that feel good for them in a very positive and happy spirit, I think we can get there.
Luna Marlborough, what a good note to end on tonight. Just some feedback before we go. 45 seconds left in the program. Hi, John. I will pay Mrs. Sonotti's car repair bill and other ongoing costs. I'm not wealthy, but I'm fully willing to share with this brave lady. That from Glenn in Karori. Glenn, that is a wonderful thing to say. Thank you. We will put you in touch with her and we really appreciate it. $20 million for Katruda. Considering National gave $11.5 million to a Saudi businessman, that's half the cost right there, says Frank. Minimum wage, if your profits rely on paying employees a pittance, maybe you should consider a different career path, says Adrian. Lots of feedback tonight. We appreciate it and we appreciate you listening and watching. That is Checkpoint for today on behalf of the team. We hope to see you tomorrow night at 5. Good night.
You're listening to RNZ National, where it's 6:30. Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Tonight, refugees reach breaking point in Macedonia and France. A former Malaysian Prime Minister resigns from the UMNO party, and members of South Korea's parliament break a world record. Those stories and more in World Watch PM. There have been dramatic clashes between riot police and refugees in Europe. Hundreds of people were tear-gassed on the border between Macedonia and Greece after they broke down a barbed wire fence. In northern France, asylum seekers set fire to huts as authorities try to dismantle part of a large migrant camp in Calais. The incident come as more countries